Hi, welcome to TankSpot's Guide to the Protection Warrior. My name's Raiden, and in this video I'll be covering the basics of Protection Warrior mechanics and abilities. Warriors have three stances: Battle, Defensive, and Berserker stance. Defensive stance is the stance that warriors tank in, as it decreases damage taken by 10%, damage caused by 5%, and increases threat generated. Warriors rely on rage in order to use our abilities. Unlike mana, we start out with an empty bar which caps at 100 and, simply put, gain rage from hitting things, being hit by things, or using special abilities such as Blood Rage or Charge. If you spec into shield specialization, you will gain 5 rage every time you block, parry, or dodge. Heroic Strike is what we call a rage dump, an ability that doesn't share a global cooldown and exists solely to expend the extra rage you aren't using. That means is that we can and should use Heroic Strike while simultaneously going through our normal rotation. During boss fights and raids, you will almost always have a full rage bar, so get used to spamming it while hitting other abilities. If you're tanking more than one mob, replace Heroic Strike with Cleave as your rage dump. One thing to keep in mind is the nature of rage. A lot of time you will have more rage than you know what to do with, but other times you will find yourself having a difficult time gaining rage. In those situations, you need to be careful so that you do not rage starve yourself. People refer to rage dumps as a gas pedal, which basically means you need to learn to let it go every bit or so to gain rage. Don't constantly keep it queued up at the same speed. You should never rage starve yourself to the point of lacking rage for your normal rotation. Now before I delve into rotations, let's talk about talented abilities we'll need for said rotations. The first ability you can find in the third tier of the protection tree, which is Last Stand. When used, Last Stand grants you 30% of your maximum health for 20 seconds. The next ability is Concussion Blow, which can be found in the fourth tier of the protection tree. Concussion Blow is a stun that lasts for 5 seconds and is required to get Vigilance. Vigilance is a crucial threat ability, which has many uses and makes warrior tanking easier in many aspects. It's a buff that you put on a selected raid member which reduces their damage taken by 3%, transfers 10% of the threat they cause to you, and if they pull aggro, refreshes your taunt ability. In a typical raid setting, you will most likely want to put Vigilance on the player who will transfer the most threat to you. One thing to keep in mind for threat-sensitive fights is that you don't always have to keep it up on a single player the entire duration of the fight. A good example is Hodier, especially on hard mode difficulty. Due to a combination of the damage buffs and the mobility required to tank, it's difficult to hold aggro against everyone without making use of several tricks, one of which is Vigilance swapping. Just keep an eye on the threat meter and be ready to switch targets on the go. The second major use of Vigilance is for taunt refreshing. Fights such as Thartharion with 3 drakes, warriors shine taking the little adds due to having taunt refreshed in an AoE setting. And last of all, it's especially good in situations such as faction champions, where the threat factor is hardly existent but the damage reduction is very appealing. I personally put it on a healer who tends to take a lot of damage, and coupled with Intervene, it makes protecting that healer a manageable feat. Moving on to the next ability, we have Warbringer in the 9th tier of the protection tree, which allows you to charge and intercept in defensive stance. Next to that, we have Devastate, a primary ability used in tanking rotations as well as being an essential debuff for melee players. Below that is Sword and Board, another must-have talent. It increases the critical strike rating of your Devastate for 1, but when you use Devastate or Revenge, it has a 30% chance of refreshing your Shield Slam ability and reducing its rage cost by 100% for 5 seconds. This talent is a defining threat ability for protection warriors. And last, just below Sword and Board, we have Shockwave, which is AoE stun, but also one of our 2 AoE tanking abilities. Protection warriors have no specific rotation we follow, but instead have a priority system for our abilities. Our primary threat abilities in order of priority are Shield Slam, Revenge, Concussion Blow, Shockwave, Devastate. Our rotation is more of a priority system because all of our cooldowns eventually overlap each other, as well as Sword and Board proccing, making it difficult to follow any set rotation. When you are boss tanking, however, Devastate actually gets bumped up on the list and becomes top priority until you get Sunder Armor stacked to 5, as it's a major buff to your melee DPS. With that said, warriors are very flexible in terms of rotations. We have many abilities we must weave in between cooldowns. When tanking a boss encounter, I typically begin with a shield block and then shield slam for burst threat. Then put up demoralizing shout and thunderclap, immediately followed by sunder to 5. You also need to be prepared to weave in things such as interrupts, berserker rage, vigilance target switches, and shout and debuff refreshes. If there's one thing prot warriors exclusively have that other tanks don't, it would be an arsenal of magic interrupts and stuns. We have Heroic Throw, which if talented silences the target for 3 seconds. Then there's Revenge, which again, if talented gives us a 15 to 45% chance to stun the target for 3 seconds. If applicable, charging a target also works. Last of all, and most reliable, are Concussion Blow, Shockwave, and Shield Bash. Learn to efficiently make use of all your cooldowns, Shield Wall, Last Stand, and Trinkets too. Unless healers are dead and the boss's health is low on a close kill, it's typically not a good idea to use all cooldowns at once. It's also good practice to save them for moments when bosses have increased damage, rather than a large damage spike and you overreacting. If you have to often use cooldown because a healer isn't paying attention, it puts you in a difficult position when you actually need it for things like enrages. Trust your healers to do their job so you can do yours. AoE tanking as a warrior is typically regarded as being a bit more work than the other tanking classes. You don't really have an AoE rotation, but more or less a few abilities situationally used in conjunction with our normal single target priority rotation. When I pull groups of adds, such as in Heroics, I thunderclap as I'm charging in, and then I run through the mobs and turn them out to cluster them correctly. Then I shockwave. Mob placement is key to being successful at multiple mob tanking as a warrior. Shockwave is a great snap aggro ability, but with its rather lengthy cooldown of 20 seconds, you don't want to waste it by not hitting all your targets with it. The hardest part about multi-mob warrior tanking is the tab targeting. With lesser geared or skilled DPS, it might not be necessary to tab target. But if you have decent DPS, merely spamming Thunderclap and Shockwave aren't enough to hold aggro. Tab 3 your mobs constantly going through your normal single target rotation to keep good threat up on every single mob. For tanking adds in a boss encounter, you need to be prepared to be even more flexible than main tanking, as it's not a simple press threat buttons and win situation. If you need to constantly pick up adds, you need to be able to assess your tools available and respond immediately. Thunderclap is very good for multiple add pickup, but if it's just 1 or 2 adds, we have many other viable options. If Heroic Throw is down, as our taunt is ranged, it can also work as a backup pulling tool. Never forget that you can also charge an add, or if the add is frolicking towards a healer, you can intervene and then smack it with a shield slam. You can also turn enemy health plates on by pressing V, which helps in any case you don't notice single adds. Since we're on the subject, Warbringer and Intervene really help define warriors in terms of utility. Beyond being a pulling tool and a source of rage, there are many other situations these abilities come in handy. If a boss has a knockback, you can charge back immediately so the raid does not have to reposition. If you are backed out of range of Stormcaller Brandir due to overload, you can time your charge back to interrupt his next cast. You can also make good use of the stun ability in particular situations such as faction champions. And last of all, don't underestimate using Intervene as a means of getting out of range of nasty boss abilities or to get somewhere faster. If a mob is too far away to charge, for example, you can even intervene someone first and then charge it. Before I end this guide, I'd like to address another major component of tanking. While it's not specific to warrior tanking, it's something I feel most beginner tanks don't understand. You can gear correctly and press threat buttons in the right order, but that doesn't compensate for poor situational awareness and mobility. As a tank, you play a key role in your raiding team, and while you are no more important than any other single player, your raid is only as good as you are. If a damage dealer dies to standing on fire, he simply made a mistake. If you, the tank, dies to standing on fire, you've most likely just caused your raid a wipe. Get into the habit of keeping yourself aware of your surroundings by zooming your camera out fully instead of staring at the boss's feet. That way, you have a better chance of seeing area effect abilities and adds roaming about. And last of all, mobility. If you've noticed a mob as it spawns, it won't do you any good if you slowly keyboard turn to go pick it up. If you see fire, slowly backpedaling out of it won't keep you any more alive. Learn to strafe while being able to tank, as the raid can't halt its functions because you can't press more than one button at once. Learn to be able to move bosses without having to turn your back to it. These are all crucial habits to get into because all the threat per second in the world won't do you any good if you can't manage your rotation as you're guiding the balls backwards. Most tanks don't hold these skills until they tank for a long time, but it's easy to learn. Practice while doing dailies or even PvP. Your raid will thank you. Good luck in your tanking endeavors, and thanks for watching this movie. As always, feel free to ask questions or add suggestions either on YouTube or in the thread on TankSpot. Also, TankSpot donors can download all of these movies in high definition directly from our servers. Click the second link in the movie information box to learn more.